So I hope everybody liked the story. It is from a book, and I'm going to talk a little bit about all of that and the real people it's based on. Here's Dara Horn. She's very young. I kind of, like, she's younger than me. She's older than me. I think she's definitely younger than me, or she's whoever does her whatever. She's looking good. People Love Dead Jews, which talks a little bit about anti-Semitism. And I had played with doing that book, but it's people love it or hate it. But
I hated it.
Done. Pardon?
I hated it.
Isabel, Izzy, I hate it.
Yeah, well, I see. It's very polarizing.
I'm reading it right now, Alice. I'm reading it.
And do you like it?
Well, I wrote these notes because there's a lot that relates to our story that I wanted to tell everybody, but maybe you will.
But she wrote Eternal Life, A Guide to the Perplexed.
Oh.
He also has a very good one. It takes All Other Nights, and that takes place during the Civil War. And as somebody who is always looking for Jewish books that do not take place during the Holocaust, that's a good one. So in this story, we have, let me tell you a little bit about Dara Horn. Oh, yeah, she's 45. Dara Horn is a Jewish American novelist, essayist, and professor of literature. She has written 5 novels and in 2021 released a nonfiction essay collection titled People Love Dead Jews, which was a finalist for the 2021 Kirkus Prize in Nonfiction. She has 4 children. She went to Harvard, and she's gotten the National Jewish Book Award for fiction. But what I found out about the National Jewish Award for the Book Award for Fiction is you can nominate your book for $500 or your publisher or whatever.
Really?
So, yes. So Rachel Kamen, you all know her. Ever since she's told me that, I'm like, National Book Award, you nominated yourself.
That's who I took the class with. That's who I took from Bethel, Rachel Kamen.
Yes, I think Dara Horn is amazing, and I like all of her books. So the other people that she talks about, here is the one we haven't heard about is Der Nister, and that's what he looked like. He was a real person. He wrote stories, and here, this picture. Let's see if I can get this one up. In this picture, if you can see on the right, is Chagall. That's Chagall, Der Nestor. There's all these famous people in this orphanage. And when you think about it, wow. The other person, of course, is Chagall. And here are pictures of what Chagall looks like. And of course, anyone who lives in Chicago, whether it's at the, that's over the town, they talk about that. Whether it's in Daily Plaza or at the Art Institute, I love Chagall. I love his beautiful paintings. And I feel like Chicago has an affinity for that. Okay, so did you like the story?
Vanessa, could I just throw in when you show
that? Wait, Alice and then Terry.
Okay. I'm reading, it's kind of weird. It kind of shocked me, but I'm reading People Love Dead Jews right now. Okay, so I just have to say, it really, oh my God, I was so upset after reading this part. So she does a whole part about Russia or the Soviet. Okay, so Der Nister, he, as you said, he was at this orphanage with Chagall. Okay, he left the Soviet Union, but then he came back. And I read he died in a Soviet prison hospital. So that, okay, that's one thing. The guy, they talk about, I don't know if I'm pronouncing right, Mikhals, Mikhoels.
Yeah.
He was murdered, but I have to tell you, he was murdered after Stalin sent him during World War II to the United States to raise money for the Red Army from American Jews. And then he came back, and I don't know when he was murdered, but they murdered him. Then this other guy, Benjamin Zuskin, I don't know if he's mentioned in our story, he was murdered. All these people were murdered. I mean, they were used by the Soviet Union for their purposes. I mean, Chagall was lucky because he left. So
Right.
I just want to say one other thing about Chagall, and then I'll shut up. Okay, Chagall, it says in the story that his wife and children went to Vitebsk. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers was from Vitebsk, and I knew Chagall was from Vitebsk. I thought Vitebsk was this little shtetl, but it wasn't. It was a pretty big town. So I wrote Chagall when he lived in this small town in France. I don't remember what the town was. And I addressed it, Marc Chagall, blah, 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 France. And I told him this whole story. And I said, maybe you knew my grandmother. Her name was blah, 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 blah. And I never heard from him. Now I'll shut up. That's my.
I was waiting for you heard from him. All right, Terry.
Well, part of what I was going to say was mention that Chagall was the one who did leave. Everyone else in that picture evidently was murdered. So sadly, it was kind of the who's who of the art world that was in that orphanage. And Chagall fortunately did leave. And the other thing that I remember reading is that Dernister, because his writings were considered, what's the word? They weren't okay with the Soviet Union. He hid them.
Inflammatory.
Thank you. He hid them behind Chagall's paintings. That was like what he did all the time. So that comes out in the story as well. And when it's mentioned, he said, I think Boris will do fine with a pregnant painting. That kind of gave me pause because of the story that he remembered about his mother and her pregnancy, and obviously what happened was, of course, horrible. So just a few little tidbits that I thought of.
Izzy and then Lynn. Izzy,
I didn't have my hand. No, I just wanted to say I love the story, and I thought
Okay.
it was very well written. And I've read other books by her. And the
Okay,
other,
yay.
there were other parts of the story everybody likes that I did not like, but I think she's a wonderful author. Beautiful books. So I love.
All right. Lynn.
Now, I just remember seeing a movie about a couple from the United States who went over and rescued a ton of artists and brought them to the smuggled them out and brought them to the United States. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Wait. The pictures or the people?
The movie, the people.
Oh.
There was a husband and wife who were very active in getting people out of Germany. I believe it was Germany. And they concentrated on not train conductors, but conductors and
Orchestra conductors.
orchestra people, famous people. And that's who they got out to save that creativity element. But I can't remember.
During World War II?
During World War II.
Mhm.
There was an exhibit about that at the field.
I read that too.
Was there that? So it's not my imagination
No,
that happened. Okay.
Yeah, but it's the Soviet Union. Yeah. So
It was the Soviet Union. It was one of those countries. I mean, it was either Germany or the Soviet Union or wherever they were.
It probably was Germany because a lot of people got out of Germany. I feel like more people got out of Germany than got out of the Soviet Union. Yeah.
Ellen.
Well, I have a question. Isn't this story set before World War II? What's the setting? What's
This
the
is
year of the story?
1920.
Yes, I thought. Okay, so I didn't understand the relevance of I thought you were talking about World War II. Okay, thank you. I thought it was much earlier, but I wanted to make sure. I love the story. I thought it was very, there was a lot of meaning in it. It kind of went on in the middle. I kept wanting to know what was going to happen, but I liked it. I think there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah. Okay, let me go to my, yeah. Here we go. The novel incorporates the lives of two real artists, Marc Chagall and Dear Nista. Do you think, and obviously we have a short story, do you think the portrayals are fair from what we read? Because, you know, obviously the book elaborates more on that. Ellen.
Well, I don't know about Dear Nista because I haven't really given that as much thought, but I think that using Marc Chagall as a inspiration and I mean, I don't think this kid knew he was had any inkling that he was an artist. We didn't know anything about his ever drawing. I mean, I reread the passage where he first goes into the room and sees the paintings on the wall and he thinks they're ugly, and maybe that started the whole process because he could tell the teacher didn't think they didn't exhibit what you could see, which is what he was encouraging them to paint. So I thought that whole part with Chagall inspiring him and taking him to his studio and that whole thing was just very meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, this is, the early 1900s. The Impressionists were just a few years before. So to do these type of Chagall type paintings was against what was happening. They had the portraits and the very solemn, and I'm sure in Russia, Taka, even more solemn. So I think that, to kind of let that flow, even today, I would imagine in art school and, I can tell you, we had at Azruri, we had an artist from Israel, and he, worked at the Tel Aviv museum, and he was a real artist. And if we said arts and crafts, he would have a fit. And when we asked for lanyard, he would have a fit. And what he got the kids to do was amazing. And he ran an art school in Tel Aviv, and then over COVID, it got shut down. I mean, we see time and time again how art programs get shut down, yet we see how they save. I mean, what happens to Boris later on, you got to read the book. Lynn. And then Susan.
To me, the story structurally looks like a Chagall painting because I found thematic threads and then stop and then go on to another thread and then another image and I try to bring it all together, but that's sometimes not possible. But I think in that respect, we call it form and function. I think that the form of the story contributes to the function of what she's trying to communicate to us, the reader. I don't know if other people had that feeling that it was a little bit disjointed here.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was my feeling.
Yeah, I agree with that. Susan and then Alice.
Well, Vanessa, your question was the story fair to these artists?
Yes.
And I really don't know that much about Marc Chagall's personal life. However, when I was reading this story, what struck me was he comes into this, the child, Boris, comes into this home and it smells so terrible. And there are feces in the home. And the second thing was, here is this child who has no shoes. And this artist is bartering with him about drawings, as opposed to saying, you know what, how about if I take your drawing and I get you some shoes? Well, I was wondering about this. What kind of a person was he? He was a teacher. He came into this school as an art teacher. And I was wondering about him as a person. And so the question was it fair? because I know nothing about his personal life, I don't know, but I didn't think it was a particularly positive view of him as a human being and a teacher.
It fascinating, so fascinating because I have such a positive, image of him. I didn't think about that. Alice and then Sue.
It's hard when we're reading an excerpt from a novel because it's just an excerpt from a novel. This was a novel. I'm not sure if I read it. I think I might have read it. If I read it, it was a long time ago. But so I think it's unfair to make these judgments because you don't know how the relationship develops. So I think I think we're left just with the few pages, and we have to kind of evaluate those few pages and what we get out of those few pages and what the author's trying to express in those few pages. Because if we make judgments about the people, well, we don't really, we don't know what happens. Yes, Chagall and Dear Nister were real people, so we know what happens to them. I'm assuming since this was a novel that Boris was a fictional character. So we don't know what happens to him as a person. So I know that's just my opinion. And I did want to ask, I thought one of the interesting things was that story, is it Dear Nister's story? Yeah, I think it is, about the bridge. And, I think that's worth discussing. And then at the end, the very last line was, for what he had seen up above was now seared forever into his mind. The man who laughed at him, I'm not sure who he knew at last, and the man who praised his imagination, who he already saw disappearing. So I'm not sure which man is which and what that means, but I think that.
Right, the disappearing, I think, is Chagall because of his art. All right, I have Sue, Evie, and then Lynn.
No, I thought it was somebody else.
Sue?
I want to go back to, I have no voice. I want to go back to something that Susan said that gave me a clue about a comparison that Boris made. And it was that Chagall was more like the bad boys, and Der Nister, who I'm not familiar with at all, so I know nothing about him, but was more like his mother and the quote good people. And that just puzzled when I read it. It puzzled me so much. But Susan just gave me a clue. Why wouldn't he be compassionate, more interested in helping the child and getting him shoes or food or whatever than making a deal for his art? That was so interesting. So, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Evie and then Lynn, and then Izzy.
I have more a question, a general question to all of you rather than a comment. I just find the discussions invaluable. I really was lost in this story. And Vanessa, when you give your introduction and the background and so forth at the beginning of our sessions, I'm just wondering how many of you do a certain amount of research about the author or anything beforehand? I didn't even know that Der Nister was a real person. I thought it was maybe a Yiddish name that I didn't recognize or something. I was really lost, but I find that, and I've also always been torn about book reviews and reading up about movies ahead of time in general. So I'm just a very quick, if some of you could comment who are really very well read.
I can tell you that Merle sent me this article that I'm putting in the chat. Obviously, I looked them all up. Vanessa, and even I help Rabbi with his movie class. I try to watch it first and then look up the reviews. Although I live with someone who will remain nameless, who I go to the movies with. And like, if it doesn't get a high enough star rating, he's like, no, we can't go.
I
I'm
live with
like,
that person.
everyone loves it. He goes, no, look, it's not high enough stars. All right. I have Lynn and then Izzy, and then we'll keep people can keep contributing.
I don't know where to start. The bridge. Let's start with the bridge.
Yes.
There's so much diametrically opposite value systems going on in this story. To me, it was a conflict between morality and survival. You know, what is your preference? And there's evil in the world. You know, there's evil in the world and there's goodness in the world, and you have a choice of what you want to be. I think that's part of the theme of the story. And there were those bad boys and there were those good boys. And so the question is, what about human nature? What is it that we choose to be? And we have to, when he says, I love the part about you have to see when you do your art. And what does that mean? And that's what I grappled with as I was reading this story, coming up with the definition of seeing rather than, you know, just painting what is. And I think he is talking about getting into the mind, getting into your own mind, and how does that piece of art resonate with you? Chagall was an artist. That's his first priority. That's what he was thinking about. That's his survival mode. And if you look at the boy, he was more interested in the painting than he was getting his shoes. So I think we can't judge people. I mean, I think you make your own choice in what you want to do with your life. And I was overwhelmed with the story. I thought there was just so much going on in this story, which is why I thought it was like a Chagall painting. I mean, you look here and then you look there and you look here and then how do we put it all together? And that was, to me, what I was waiting. That's what I want to talk about today. What you all thought the meaning of the story was. I'm into the meaning. This shards of pottery that he mentions, I thought of Ike's sermon during the high holidays. You know, when the pottery breaks and you have those shards left over, how do you put them all together to get that whole piece? And I am convinced that once we get all these shards put together, we will get to the meaning of the story. So I think everyone brings something else to the story. And it's the same way as looking at a Chagall painting. Right. You know, what do people see? Everybody sees something different. So,
you know, I think that's a task, you know, of bringing everything together is, you know, just something that we're always working on, and certainly applies to our group. Izzy and then Alice. Izzy?
Yeah, I thought that it was such a beautiful story. I never even thought about the shoes. I was just so happy. I thought it was almost like a fable. What happened to this little boy, how he took him under his wing, and your meester. I mean, that's what the boy needed. But I also think what all those little boys needed, and the horror of their bad dreams at night, they needed to confront their past and move on. And I think that was a big theme of the book. Yep. Because
and that was Rabbi Mothick's in his if you heard his I think it was the Devar on Yom Kippur, move on, okay, keep moving. Keep moving.
That was the big theme of this to me. And that, you know, all the boys dreaming at night, and he, at the beginning of the book, doesn't remember anything. Only remembers that last night with his mother, but he doesn't remember anything afterwards. And I think what Chagall and Der Nister were trying to do to him is to have him look what you see, remember what you saw, then you can move on. And his mother wanted him to remember too, because he, when she told him that story about what was the story she told him about when the baby knows everything and then the baby's born and doesn't remember anything and then he has to remember.
Isn't
it
that
again.
your frenulum?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was beautiful. And that was like an allegory telling him the same kind of thing, the same kind of idea. And then when Dernister asked him his name, he started to remember. And at the end of the book, and that was the healthiest thing for him, because if he could confront his past, he could go to the future. I just saw that it was in a movie group with Jay Sorkin. We talked about The Last Mensch. And that was really about the theme about that, of accepting your past. But also the last line, see, I had a totally different take on it. I thought it says, for what he had seen up above was now seared forever into his mind. The man who laughed at him, who knew he would last. And I'm thinking he's thinking Dernister is going to last. And the man who praised his imagination, who we already saw was disappearing. He wanted his imagination because it was worse than life itself. So I thought that was healthy, that he was going to move on.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Alice and then Merle.
Yeah, thank you, Izzy. You gave me a lot to think about this story. But what I was going to say about Chagall and Dernister, it says in the story that they had worked together for a long time. Dernister wrote the stories and Chagall illustrated them. I'm thinking, I'm sure this is true. They didn't choose to be at this orphanage. I mean, this was something that the Soviets demanded of them, I'm assuming, that they worked there. As probably as a way of surviving. So I found a lot of their up and back, their conversation was very sarcastic. And, they knew each other very well. They knew the Soviet system very well. And so I think that was an interesting part of the story. The kind of like, when you know somebody really well, you have a certain way of communicating with them, almost like a secret language. And I felt that was displayed here. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Meryl, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify, it was Dernister who said to him, "You have a wonderful imagination." And it was Dernister who was the one who was already disappearing, because it sort of foreshadows the fact that Dernister is the one who's going to die young.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know.
I mean, it was just like
I
one line thrown, but he was
didn't know that.
You have a wonderful imagination. Dernister called behind him as the door swung shut.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought what was fascinating was the reference to Hebrew, the difference between rachamim, mercy, and rachamim, wombs. And the little boy had seen this atrocity. And it really makes you wonder, what is an appropriate subject for art? And in Russia, socialist realism dominated for years. And at the Art Institute in 2017, they had an exhibition on Russian revolutionary art. And it was all about factories and farms and soldiers and schools. So this, I think one of the important parts of this story is defining what is appropriate for art. And the answer is what you feel.
Right.
I felt that he had to tell the story of this atrocity that he saw with his mother in the womb and the baby. It was so horrible. And now he was finally able to, as someone had said earlier, get this feeling out and move forward. And but this part about rachamim and rachamim, I don't think most people would notice that or understand it. So the author's knowledge of Hebrew and Jewish studies was fact right there.
And we were talking about, Izzy said, getting him to remember when Dernister said, "What's your Hebrew name? What's your name, your Jewish name?" And when I had kids in Hebrew school, I made them go by their Hebrew name. And, I would tell them, you use it, when you're born at your breed or your baby naming, you use it when you're called to the Torah, when you become a bar bat mitzvah, and when you get married, and it's on your tombstone. And I get a lot of phone calls of, can you read this? Can you write this? Of, people checking tombstones, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting that, he's, and he had to think about it. poor Boris had to think about it. And I think that Stalin, we know that in Russia at that time, they were trying to get rid of religion and everything was communism, communism, communism. Yet here are all these cultural icons. And much of the novel's plot is built upon historical events that are rarely explored outside of scholarly circles, such as the pogroms of 1919 or the Stalinist purge of Jewish cultural leaders. Yes, they were put there, but that was probably a punishment.
Oh, right.
Right, to go to this orphanage, and not that. Certainly in Judaism, orphans are not lowly. We're told to protect the orphans, the widows, the poor, but it was a punishment for them to go there and to work with these kids. And of course, they were all boys. Lynn.
No, I don't want, did you finish?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Okay. So I'm a great believer in going back to the first paragraph of a story.
Oh, okay.
Because I think a lot of the themes and messages are in there. If you notice, he's talking in flashback about this Jewish boys colony, 1920. He was 11 years old. And from the entire first 10 years of his life, he could recall almost nothing but a single incident. One day long ago in the town where he used to live, he could see in the clarity of a single frame memory that it was a beautiful day, one of those spring days when the air becomes like clear water rippled by a breeze and the ground loses its grip and you feel as though you are not walking but swimming in air, flying weightless over the town. He had seen a group of boys beating a horse. Look at the conflict between those two images. One is a beautiful scene in nature, and next he sees these boys beating a horse, which is again the beautiful natural scene, and then human nature in the abyss. One's a heavenly scene and one's man in the abyss. And there's your bridge that he talks about later on. So man has the potential to be dark, or he can be good. He can be evil and he could be good.
I also think
one more thing. I want to go to the end. Boris, who until then had been riveted to his spot by morbid fascination, could no longer watch. Later in Malakahovka, I think, he remembered the whole scene had confused him, upset him, but he could no longer remember why he had been upset or confused. I got that shades of, I know that this doesn't take place during the Holocaust, but never forget seems to be permeating the story as well. And it comes up later too, that you cannot forget. I know he has to move on, but because if you don't remember, you cannot act. And if you do not act or interfere in the evil, there can be no good. So I think the conflict between good and evil in the story, man, I believe in the literature that I taught kids, we did a lot of man's dark. Everyone has a dark side, truly. And unless you confront that dark side, you can't remediate it. So he doesn't remember, and that's a problem of not remembering. So I think that's another theme that comes through the story. Again, morality versus survival is in a war situation or in an orphanage or whatever. He sees a lot of evil there as well. Why is it called The World to Come? What kind of future? I kept thinking about today when I read this story. I mean, what kind of future is there if man isn't civil to each other?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have to say.
Yikes! I'm thinking about today. Merle and then Evie.
I was looking up something about the world to come after I read the story, and it was a reference to the end of days when all the dead people will be resurrected and things will be better and things will be good again. So that was one interpretation, but the other one was the world to come is actually the world we're living in right now. That every day when we live is the world to come. So it has a kind of double entendre.
Right.
Oh, very cool.
And of course, when you ask any you know, when you ask many rabbis or Jewish whoever scholars, is there a hell? You know, what happens after you die? They say there's the world to come, olam haba, and that is a you know, that's their go-to answer. So that's another layer on top of this. Abby.
I was also thinking of quite a bit about the shards, and I think a lot of things that we read, I have a reference to shards and broken glass and so on and so forth. But just like with the memory and with shards, I think you remember the feelings and not the details. And I think in our personal lives, we remember, you know, the joys and the sorrows and so on and so forth, or the anger or the hurts. And when we go back to try to remember what really happened, it's a blur, but the feelings are still there. And I think that's part of, you know, with the beauty of the shards, that it's just a blend of all kinds of feelings and thoughts and so on and so forth. But in terms of the detail, what were the shards actually from, or what were the specifics of the memory? I don't know if that's good or bad. I like to think of it as being helpful and good, but on the other hand, we do need to know the specifics in order to remediate, as Lynn was saying.
So you know, when we talk about the broken vessels, in order to make space for creation, you know, God, in Hebrew, it's Ein Sof, which means there's no end, contracts. And empty space resulted. And then God sent a ray of life that was to initiate the actual act of creation. And many people talk about Tzimtzum, which is gathering these vessels back. Let me just, it's a term used of contracting. And sometimes you hear people saying, for Tzimtzum, like when I'm leading a discussion, I need to Tzimtzum, I need to hold back, because could I talk for an hour? Yes, I could. Should I talk for an hour? No. So, and maybe perhaps some of our teachers, Jewish or not, should do more Tzimtzum. And it's just that I use it, you know, with my colleagues, like you need to, you know, Tzimtzum, or I need to Tzimtzum. And of course, when I say that, they all laugh. I'm always very talkative. Lynn.
I want to go back to what Evie said about the past. And I thought about that. Yeah, it's important to know your past, but to be haunted by your past is detrimental. I thought one of the most poignant sections in here was on 147, when she has almost an orchestrated procession of the people who are having post-traumatic stress reactions to what has happened to them in the past. And you get this crying, sobbing, and it's in different, from different age groups, and it's pervasive. What do you do with that haunting of what happened to you in the past? I mean, that is so, I think many times when we say you have to remember your past, you have to remember your past, having to deal with it is another thing, which he doesn't get into here, but it's part of the orchestra of what has happened to you.
Yeah, Ellen and then Alice.
Well, you know, she puts that in early, and as Alice had said before, this is just an excerpt from the whole book, so I'm trying to make sense of it just in this passage that she gives us. But I think it gives Boris a understanding that there are others, you know, his classmates, because he has had no relationships with people
Right.
other than his parents. So it gives him an understanding through these horrible dreams, you know, or expressions of their remorse, that other people have gone through what he's gone through. And I don't know, I kind of look at this, maybe it's oversimplified, but you know, when they have to paint, and Chagall has elicited just paint what you see, and he digs deep and he goes into his past and he gets it all out, and that's got to be cathartic.
Therapeutic.
Yeah, and
Yep.
therapeutic. So I think even in this little excerpt, there's so much that she gives us in this small space that just all comes together.
Yeah.
Alice.
Yeah, this is gonna continue what Lynn and what Ellen just said. I you know, after that passage, Lynn, on 147, 148,
Yeah.
towards the end of that long paragraph, it says that Boris would fight to stay awake for as long as he could, towards the surrenders of cringing before a beating, to his own mangled dreams. And then he met Comrade Chagall. And I think this goes to what Ellen said. I think it was therapeutic. The art was therapeutic for him. I don't know that much about art therapy, but I know it's used for children that are chronically ill,
Yeah, sure.
for children who have mental issues, maybe for children who are imprisoned. So children, well, probably people, not just children,
Right.
adults too, that are in all these severely, what do I want to say, constricting.
Yeah.
The words aren't coming to me. But anyways, I agree with you, Ellen. I think just him saying and then he met all, I think he was able to get all these horrible, I mean, memories and thoughts into his art. And I think it was therapeutic. I agree with you.
I have another question.
Yeah, Ellen. And then Mel.
I had looked up Chagall after I had read this, and he was in Russia apparently, and I think this must be the time that we see that the story is written. He's met this wonderful woman who he eventually marries and goes to France with, and you, as you said, I didn't know that he's the only one that really survives. Is he waiting to go back to what you know? Is he waiting to go back to get his wife from that Vibesk, whatever the name is? It's just he's assigned there. We don't know anything more about how he gets. I mean, because this part is probably real, isn't it? That they were.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a punishment. He was a cultural leader. He was already a famous artist.
Oh, so
that's a punishment.
Yeah.
And the Stalin and the Soviet culture tamped all that down. I mean, tried to destroy it.
Do we know that he and Dernister were at the same place at one time? Well, she may have researched that.
I think, yes, there was that picture.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's right.
They were definitely there.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was looking at this article on jewishbookcouncil.org, and it says this book actually starts out with the grandson of Boris. Boris's real name was Benjamin, and he had a grandson named Benjamin. And Benjamin steals a small Chagall painting from an art museum. Yes, that's how the novel begins.
Wow.
And then it goes back to the history of how his grandfather, Boris, as we know him, but all his real name was Benjamin, how he knew Chagall. And so it's sort of a device for getting back to the Jewish history of how this all started, which I thought was very fascinating.
You got to read the book. It's a good book.
Yeah, it really makes
a mystery, and
But I mean, as I read this as an excerpt, there was so much missing. What does this little boy have to do with everything? Why is it told from the little boy's point of view? And now, I mean, we know that it was his grandson who steals the Chagall painting, which then throws you back to the history of how Boris, the grandpa, met Chagall. So it really is more about Chagall and Nister and the Jewish history. That's really what this was about.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Susan and then Izzy.
Well, here's what I liked. I liked very much, if you teach writing, you say sometimes to students, start with what you know. And then you go to responding to what you know and feeling what you know. And of course, Chagall did the same thing with the art. And this kid produced something that was from a horrible, horrible event, something that was very beautiful, but it wasn't exactly what happened. He talks about, well, the baby was too fat. And then there was this blue dot underneath his nose. So there was, of course, some artistic license to make it more of whatever it was. So I like that a lot. And I also thought it was interesting when Chagall first looks at all of the students' paintings, he lines them all up and he says, none of them are good enough. You've got to do better. And so he had high expectations for these kids. And this one kid, this Boris, because he saw something, there's a difference, I guess, between looking and seeing, just like there is between listening and hearing. And so I thought that was a pretty good distinction. Don't just look at something, see it. And what does it mean to really see it? And to see it, you respond to it. To see it, you process it in a different kind of way. And I like that.
Okay, Izzy and then Lynn.
I also thought there was another theme, capitalism versus communism. Because he said, I want to trade you something. I mean, I'm not going to just give you the painting. I want something back from it. And I think that was, on the bottom of page 162, he says, I have to go back. I have to go back, Boris says, acutely aware of his lie. The council will be angry if I don't get my chores done. And he says, Der Nister frown, spoken like a true Marxist, from each according to his abilities. Workers of the world unite and break the little artist back. So he's applauding. I mean, he's understanding what happens. They're training them to be good little Marxists by doing this, doing that, doing that. But he realizes that that's not a good thing. And then I think the trade was a painting for a painting. I don't think that the pair of shoes would have done for Boris what the painting had done.
Here.
In my mind.
Yeah. Lynn.
I'm just wondering if the womb is a symbol for the entire story about birth and creation and starting over and finding out who you are. And because it's twice, it's the mother's story of the womb and then the painting of the womb. And it's just an idea, but it's in there for a reason. And I think that symbol is always indicative of creating something of yourself. And I think Meister,
Dear Nister.
Nister, yeah. He saw the potential in Boris. And I think he, particularly at the end, about how he was going to, he called it a pregnant painting. So I think there's lots of imagery there of what do you make of yourself? What are the idea of choice, where there's no control in a society versus a society that allows you to choose, to make choices about what you could be, and all those images of oppression and darkness in this orphanage. I have a question. This Jewish boys' colony that he starts with in the beginning, is that the orphanage or is that someplace else? That's the orphanage. Okay.
Going back to the bridge on page 158, and paraphrasing, and then I'll read a little bit. Satan says to the bridge, you go down to the muck, and he breaks. He does. The Sabbath day passes. God says Shavua Tov, a good week. To the bridge, and the bridge felt filthy, and suddenly he pulled himself up and broke off the part of himself that was stuck in the abyss. This is on the top of 159. Right. He felt no more slime on his feet. The light of his head became dim, like the eyes of a beaten man. A good week, the bridge said, echoing God's blessing, and his eyes were downcast and ashamed. Der Nister, which means the hidden one, stopped reading, but Boris wasn't sure that the story was over. How could that be the end of the story? Was there really no way out of the slime? I mean, that is
the essence for
the
me.
Essence. Yeah. Is there no way out of the slime? And what is the slime? And can you do it yourself? Because, the bridge got out of the slime without God's help. And Merle.
my impression was that we cannot get out of the slime. We can't forget the slime. We have to help the people who are stuck in the slime, that you can't just make it all light and happiness, because that's not what life is. So I think that's why he was ashamed after he broke out of the slime, that he was trying to run away, like, you know, the 1% in the world who just live in luxury and don't think about anyone who's help them. Yeah.
Listen, right. And this was by Dear Nister, who is, I think, obviously much more is darker and pessimistic. And, you know, Chagall was lighter and, these were their personalities. And also, as we get near the end here, on page 163, the last paragraph, Lynn likes to look at the first paragraph. I like to look at the last paragraph. Boris was already running down the stairs as fast as he possibly could, descending into the abyss, again, that word, of the house's ground floor and the mud below, hoping the last of the stairs wouldn't break beneath his feet like the bridge. For what he had seen up above was now seared in forever into his mind. The man who laughed at him, who he knew would last, that's Chagall, and the man who praised his imagination, who he already saw disappearing, Dear Nister. Now, obviously, Dara Horn is writing this, you know, but she knows what happened to them.
Yes. Well, to me, that is the dark side of man, is
Yes.
the one that survives. But if you look at what you were reading, Vanessa, where the bridge says, "What can I do?" See, I don't think, Merle, that you have to stay in the abyss. I mean, you have a choice. You have a choice.
You have to help people who are in the abyss, though. I mean,
But you have to help yourself. You can't help them until you help yourself. I mean, you can't help them get out of the abyss unless you've gotten out of the abyss first, and then you can pull them out. That's my interpretation. What can I do? The bridge said. And the Satan said, I'll let you decide on your own. So you have to decide. Well, that's my perspective.
Yeah.
I understand your perspective.
Right. And
But
everybody, you have to put in, you know, everybody puts a little bit of themselves into this story and what's happening. I love the book. I encourage you to go back and read the book.
The book's name is, what's the book's name?
The World to Come.
The World to Come.
What I thought. Okay,
She
that's what
calls
I
this
thought.
all the world to come, but the book is the world to come.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she calls it From the World to Come, but it's in the anthology. It's titled From.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We meet again in 2 weeks. We're going to read Mila Goldberg. That'll be $2.50, please. She wrote The Bee Season. I really like her,
Oh, I like that
Oh, I
book.
love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
which I haven't read Lo these many years. And while I have everyone, I cannot help but tell you that this Sunday is the suitcase. Everyone has a story. And this man here, Tim Lorsch, is coming, and his family was, there was a suitcase in Germany that finally got to his family. It said Lorsch, and it was, you know, from the Holocaust. And he performs with archival video and a guitar, I think a guitar, I don't know. Anyway, he performs again. This we won't be taping this because it's his show. Yeah, I know. It will be virtual though. It'll be streaming. So if you're not here, you could turn it on. And let's see. You know, the classes are going if you need a link. Yeah, we're good. So, all right. It's good. Really great to see everybody. And,
Good to be back.
right. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.